Scout the Bobcat and Charlie the dog shared an inseparable bond from the moment Scout arrived as a tiny, orphaned cub. Despite their differences in size and species, they became constant companions, sleeping curled up together, playing gently, eating side by side, and even keeping up funny routines. Charlie treated the young Bobcat like a pup of his own, always gentle, patient, and protective, while Scout showed his affection at every opportunity. Their owner never imagined a domestic dog and a wild-born Bobcat could form such a powerful, trusting friendship, yet their bond became the heart of the household. It seemed like a friendship that would last forever. But when Charlie suddenly fell ill and didn't wake up, everything changed. Scout's behavior shifted from playful to heartbreaking, and eventually, the vet whispered the one word no animal lover ever wants to hear. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The call came in late on a Tuesday night, the kind of call that every wildlife rehabilitator in the rural foothills of Montana knows well, yet dreads. A construction crew clearing land near the tree line had disrupted a den. The mother was gone, spooked, and never returned, and left behind was a singular shivering scrap of spotted fur. Mark, a seasoned rehabber with calloused hands and a soft heart, took the crate into his living room. Inside was Scout. At 4 weeks old, the Bobcat kitten was hardly the apex predator he was destined to become. He was a ball of blue-eyed fury, spitting and hissing with a ferocity that outweighed his 2 pounds of body weight. He was terrified, dehydrated, and entirely alone in a world of giants. Or so he thought. Watching from the threshold of the living room was Charlie. Charlie was a shepherd mix, a rescue himself, with fur the color of toasted rye and eyes that held the patience of a saint. He was 6 years old, well past his puppy exuberance, and served as the unofficial foster father for the myriad of creatures that passed through Mark's sanctuary. But usually, those creatures were squirrels, raccoons, or fawns kept at a distance. A Bobcat was different. A Bobcat was wild incarnate. For the first 2 weeks, Mark kept them separated. Scout lived in a large, heated enclosure in the den, growing stronger on specialized formula. But the wild kitten was high-strung. He paced incessantly, his tiny claws clicking on the floor, his distress calls, a high-pitched, bird-like chirping echoing through the house at night. He needed socialization, but he was too habituated to humans to be released back into the wild, yet too wild to be a normal pet. He existed in the gray area of conservation education. One evening, Mark forgot to latch the bottom gate of the enclosure. He was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he heard a strange silence fall over the house. Usually, this was the time Charlie would be trotting around, nails tapping, anticipating a dropped carrot. Mark rushed to the living room, fearing the worst. What he found stopped him dead in his tracks. Charlie was lying on the rug, his large front paws extended. Between them, dwarfed by the dog's massive head, sat Scout. The kitten wasn't hissing. He wasn't spitting. He was trembling slightly, but he was leaning his entire body weight against Charlie's chest. Charlie, sensing the fragility of the creature, had lowered his breathing, lying perfectly still, his brown eyes fixed on Mark with a look that clearly said, "Don't worry, I've got him." That was the beginning. As the months turned into a year, the bond that formed between the domestic canine and the wild feline defied every textbook on animal behavior Mark had ever read. It wasn't just tolerance. It was a profound, inextricable brotherhood. Scout grew rapidly. The blue eyes turned to a piercing golden amber. His spots darkened, and his cheek ruffs grew in, giving him the classic stoic look of a North American lynx. But despite looking like a creature that should be stalking hares in the snow, his favorite place in the world was curled up in the crook of Charlie's stomach. Their routines became the stuff of legend in the household and, eventually, on the internet. Mark began documenting their interactions, amazed by the nuances of their communication. Mornings were for the ambush. Charlie would plod out into the fenced sanctuary yard, sniffing the morning air. Scout, utilizing his natural camouflage, would flatten himself atop the patio roof or hide behind the large oak planter. As Charlie passed, Scout would launch himself, not with claws out, but with a playful, heavy thud, landing squarely on the dog's back. Most dogs would snap or startle. Charlie would simply brace his legs, let out a huff of breath, and then gently roll over, allowing the Bobcat to pin him down. They would wrestle for 20 minutes, a tangle of limbs and mock growls. Scout used his mouth gently, inhibiting his bite force with a precision that showed he understood Charlie wasn't a prey animal, but a pack member. But it was dinner time that held their most peculiar and hilarious ritual. Mark would set down 2 bowls, high-grade kibble and cooked meat for Charlie, and raw poultry or venison for Scout. Scout was a possessive eater by nature, a wild instinct to guard resources. Yet, before he would take his first bite, he would trot over to Charlie, who was waiting patiently by his own bowl. Scout would stand on his hind legs, placing his front paws on Charlie's shoulders. Then, with intense focus, the Bobcat would press his cold, wet nose deep into Charlie's ear, holding it there for a solid 10 seconds, purring loudly, a sound like a diesel engine idling. Mark called it the brain scan. It was bizarre, funny, and deeply affectionate. Charlie would lean into it, eyes closing, his tail giving a slow, rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the floor. Only after the ear inspection was complete would Scout drop to all fours and allow them both to eat. "It's like he's checking to make sure Charlie is still in there," Mark told a visiting vet once, laughing as Scout performed the ritual. Or maybe he's whispering secrets about where the squirrels are hiding. They were inseparable. When Charlie napped in the sunbeams that cut across the living room floor, Scout was there, using the dog's flank as a pillow. When Mark took Charlie for walks along the perimeter of the property, Scout would pace the fence line from the inside, chuffing at them until they returned. They were a study in contrasts. Charlie was goofy, clumsy, and wore his heart on his sleeve. If he was happy, his whole body wagged. Scout was elegant, silent, and stoic. His emotions were subtle. A twitch of a tufted ear, a slow blink, a headbutt. But Charlie understood fluent Bobcat, and Scout understood fluent dog. For 2 glorious years, the house was filled with the sound of their play. The click of paws, the thud of bodies hitting the rug, the soft purring, and the contented sighs of 2 souls who had found their perfect match across species lines. Millions of people online watched their videos, finding hope in the idea that if a wolf descendant and a wild cat could love each other this much, maybe there was hope for everyone else. The change was subtle at first, as it often is with dogs who are too noble to complain. It started with a stumble. Charlie, usually sure-footed even in his older years, tripped coming up the porch steps. Then came the hesitation to play the ambush game. When Scout would launch from his hiding spot, Charlie wouldn't brace himself. He would buckle slightly. Scout noticed before Mark did. The roughhousing stopped abruptly. One Tuesday, Scout set himself up for a pounce, his rear end wiggling, eyes locked on Charlie. But as Charlie walked by, his gait stiff and head low, Scout didn't jump. He simply stood up, walked over, and rubbed his cheek against Charlie's leg, letting out a soft, questioning chuff. Mark took Charlie to the vet the next day. The diagnosis was a sledgehammer blow: hemangiosarcoma. Aggressive, advanced, and incurable. The vet gave Charlie weeks, perhaps a month if they were lucky. The household atmosphere shifted from a playground to a hospice. And this was where the wild heart of the Bobcat showed its true depth. Scout became a nursemaid. He seemed to understand that his big, invincible friend was breaking down. The brain scan ritual at dinner became gentler. Instead of standing on his hind legs, which might knock the unsteady dog over, Scout would wait for Charlie to lie down, then crawl over to nuzzle his ear. Scout stopped asking to go outside. He refused to leave the living room rug where Charlie spent his days sleeping. The Bobcat, an animal designed to roam miles of territory, confined his entire world to a 6-foot radius around the dying dog. He would groom Charlie for hours, his rough tongue cleaning the dog's face and ears, purring a constant vibrating lullaby. When Charlie whimpered in pain or discomfort, Scout would be there instantly, alerting Mark with a sharp, demanding cry, refusing to settle until Mark administered pain relief or adjusted Charlie's bedding. The bond had transcended friendship. It was now a vigil. The end came on a rainy November afternoon. The vet came to the house so Charlie wouldn't have to be moved. Scout was put in the other room behind a glass door. He didn't pace or scream. He sat like a stone statue, his golden eyes fixed on Charlie's form. When Charlie took his last breath, surrounded by love, Mark opened the door. He felt it was necessary for Scout to know, to understand why his friend wasn't waking up. Scout walked in slowly. He approached the body, sniffing the air, which now smelled of rain and rubbing alcohol. He sniffed Charlie's paws. He sniffed his muzzle. Then he performed the ritual one last time. He pressed his nose into Charlie's cooling ear. There was no tail thump in response, no warm sigh. Scout pulled back. He looked at Mark, then back at Charlie. He let out a sound Mark had never heard from a bobcat before. Not a scream, but a low, hollow moan that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. It was the sound of a heart breaking. The weeks following Charlie's death were a nightmare. Mark was grieving, but his grief was compounded by the terrifying decline of Scout. The bobcat fell into a deep clinical depression. In the wild, solitary animals grieve, but usually they move on for survival. But Scout had been raised in a pack of 2. Half of his self was gone. He stopped eating. The venison and expensive cuts of meat Mark offered went untouched. Scout lost weight rapidly, his coat losing its luster. But the worst part was the searching. At night, the house echoed with Scout's calls. He would pace the perimeter of the living room, checking every spot Charlie used to sleep. He would scratch at the back door, convinced Charlie was outside. When Mark let him out, Scout would run to the old oak tree, look behind the planter, and wait for the ambush that never came. He would return inside, deflate, and curl into a tight, miserable ball in the corner of the room. Not on the rug, never on the rug anymore, but on the cold hardwood. Mark tried everything. New toys, pheromone diffusers, extra attention. Nothing worked. Scout was fading. He was simply existing, waiting for a friend who wasn't coming back. The vet warned Mark that if Scout didn't start eating soon, his liver would fail. Desperation breeds innovation. One evening, scrolling through his phone and tearing up at old videos, Mark had an idea. It was a long shot, but he had nothing left to lose. He went to the closet and dug out an old iPad. He cleaned the screen and loaded up a playlist of videos, hours of footage he had taken over the years. Videos of Charlie barking, Charlie sleeping, the two of them wrestling. He walked into the living room. Scout was in his corner, staring at the wall, his ribs showing through his fur. Mark placed Charlie's old orthopedic bed in the center of the room. He propped the iPad up on a stand right in the middle of it. He pressed play. The sound of Charlie's bark, loud, joyful, and familiar, rang out from the speakers. Scout's head snapped up. His ears swiveled like radar dishes. On the screen, a video from 3 years ago played. Charlie was playing with a squeaky toy, talking in his goofy way. Scout stood up. He approached the bed, his movements cautious, his body low to the ground. He crept toward the glowing screen. He sniffed it. It didn't smell like Charlie, but the sound was home. Scout climbed onto the bed. He watched the screen with an intensity that was almost human. He watched Charlie run. He watched Charlie sleep. And then, for the first time in 3 weeks, Scout lay down. He curled up right next to the iPad, resting his chin on his paws, his eyes glued to the digital ghost of his best friend. Mark watched from the hallway, tears streaming down his face. Scout's breathing, which had been shallow and rapid for weeks, finally slowed. The tension left his shoulders. He fell asleep there, bathed in the blue light of the screen, listening to the recorded breathing of the dog he loved. The iPad became a lifeline. Every night, Mark would play the videos. It wasn't a cure, but it was a bridge. It calmed Scout enough to eat. It calmed him enough to sleep. The online community, who had mourned Charlie deeply, rallied around Scout. They sent artwork, toys, and messages of support. They watched the updates as Scout slowly, painfully began to piece himself back together. It took 6 months before Scout played again. It happened on a windy March day. A dry leaf skittered across the patio. Instinct took over. Scout pounced on it, batting it into the air. He froze, as if surprised by his own joy, and then pounced again. Life was returning, but the house was still too quiet. Mark knew he couldn't replace Charlie. You don't replace a soulmate. But he also knew that Scout was a social creature who had been raised with a canine companion. The Bobcat was lonely. He needed a heartbeat, not just a screen. Mark began the search. He knew he couldn't just bring home any dog. A hyperactive terrier would stress Scout out. A prey-driven husky would be dangerous. He needed a specific temperament. Low energy, submissive, gentle, and utterly bomb-proof. He found him at a shelter 2 counties over. Oswald. Oswald was a super mutt, a chaotic mix of Great Pyrenees, Golden Retriever, and perhaps a little bit of cow, judging by his black and white patches and his general lumbering demeanor. He was only 10 weeks old, but he already had paws the size of saucers and a personality that could best be described as clownish. Oswald didn't walk. He tumbled. He didn't bark. He made a sound like a deflating tuba. He was completely different from Charlie. Charlie had been noble and sharp. Oswald was a lovable, clumsy oaf. The introduction was done with military precision. Mark set up the baby gates again. He prepared for hissing, for aggression, for Scout to reject the intruder who dared to walk where Charlie once walked. Mark walked in with Oswald in his arms. The puppy wiggled, happy to be anywhere. Scout was perched on the high shelf of the cat tree, looking down with regal disdain. He spotted the puppy. His ears went back. He let out a low growl. Oswald, hearing the sound, looked up. He didn't cower. He didn't bark. He simply wagged his tail so hard his entire back half shook and let out a playful woof. Scout stared. This creature was ridiculous. For a week, Scout observed Oswald from the high ground. He watched the puppy trip over his own feet. He watched him get his head stuck in a cardboard box. He watched him try to befriend the vacuum cleaner. The tension in the house shifted from grief to curiosity. Scout wasn't mourning anymore. He was watching reality TV. The breakthrough happened in the kitchen. Mark was preparing dinner. Oswald, greedy as any puppy, was dancing around the bowls. Scout dropped down from the counter, landing silently behind the puppy. Oswald spun around, startled, and fell on his butt. He looked up at the bobcat, an animal capable of taking down a deer, and did the only thing he knew how to do. He licked Scout's nose. Mark held his breath. Scout froze. He blinked. He sneezed, shaking his head to get the puppy slobber off. He looked at Oswald, looked at Mark, and then, with a distinct air of resignation, he walked over to his bowl. He didn't nuzzle Oswald's ear. That was for Charlie. That was sacred. Instead, Scout did something new. He reached out a paw and gently, deliberately, bopped Oswald on the top of the head. "Sit," the gesture seemed to say. "Respect your elders." Oswald sat. A new season. 2 years have passed since Oswald arrived. The dynamic in the house is different now. It's louder, it's messier. Oswald grew into a 90-pound giant who thinks he is a lapdog. He lacks Charlie's stoic wisdom, but he makes up for it with an infectious, boundless joy that dragged Scout out of the darkness. Scout is older now. His muzzle is graying and he moves a little slower. But he is happy. The bond they have is not the soul-deep brotherhood he shared with Charlie. It's more like an uncle and a chaotic nephew. Scout is the mentor. He teaches Oswald boundaries. He keeps the dog in line. When Oswald gets too rowdy, a simple look from Scout settles him down. But there are moments, quiet moments in the late afternoon, where the past and present merge. Sometimes, when the sun hits the living room rug just right, Oswald will be sleeping deeply, snoring softly. Scout will walk over. He will circle the sleeping dog once, twice. He will settle down, not on top of him, but beside him, pressing his back against the dog's warm fur. Mark watches them, often with a framed photo of Charlie sitting on the mantel behind him. One evening, Mark caught a moment that brought it all full circle. It was dinner time. Oswald was vibrating with hunger, waiting for his bowl. Scout finished his raw meal and walked over to the giant dog. Scout stood on his hind legs. He didn't do the nose and ear. That ritual had retired with Charlie. Instead, Scout rubbed his cheek along Oswald's jawline, a marking of ownership, a sign of family. Oswald froze, accepting the affection, his tail giving a gentle thump, thump, thump. Mark smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had been missing for a long time. Charlie was gone, but the love he had taught Scout, the ability to trust, to bond, to share a life with a different species, had survived. Scout had walked through the fire of grief and come out the other side. He had learned that the heart is not a glass vessel that shatters when broken, but a muscle that grows stronger the more it is used. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, casting long shadows through the window, the bobcat and the dog lay together in the golden light. Different souls, different stories, but sharing the same warmth. It wasn't the same as it was before, and it never would be. But it was good. It was full of life. And for a bobcat named Scout, it was enough.